We're continuing to celebrate News 8's 70th anniversary.
And tonight, News 8's Ken Pierce takes us back to the early 2000s.
As the new millennium began, there were concerns about the Y2K bug.
Everybody was worried about, things going haywire, so that was a big night.
Planes were grounded, banks were concerned, and everyone spent a fortune upgrading their computer systems.
Systems that have seen very few problems as a result of Y2K.
It turns out there were no problems, so the state got ready for what would become a tradition.
And Connecticut has done it.
The UConn women won their second national championship in 2000. 2000 also meant Upsail in July, which News Channel 8 brought to you from the beach, the water, and the air. It was impressive, but the biggest show of the year started in August.
On the word that we have been getting from sources within the Gore campaign that it is actually down to 2 individuals.
At a rally in Nashville, Vice President Al Gore announced Senator Joe Lieberman would be his running mate.
He had appealed to both parties. He was the first Jew ever nominated by a major political party.
News Channel 8 sent crews all over the country with him.
To me, it was exciting, So you actually had to separate the excitement from, we have to do a job, we have to do work, we still have deadlines.
And we went, I think it was 96 hours nonstop without sleep. I hadn't done that since college. It was just unbelievable. We did like 12 cities. We was zipping across the country.
On election night, with crews at both campaign headquarters, a sudden change from the network.
Something came on the big TV screen down here. I couldn't really tell what it was, but the crowd went nuts.
Florida is back in play.
Mark Davis was there as the Florida recount went on for weeks until the U.S. Supreme Court stopped it, making George W. Bush president. Back in Connecticut, May of 2001 saw the latex foam fire in Ansonia.
At the time, we had the only helicopter in Connecticut, and that day it was such a powerful tool.
At this point is still a huge fire.
Ansonia lost its biggest employer. It seemed like the story of the year until September. The news director told Darren Kramer something was going on in New York.
And we both looked at the TV monitor that was on my desk, and we watched the second plane live hit the building together. Unreal.
161 people from Connecticut died that day. Many more had close calls.
And I opened the door of the conference room, and I saw the plane go by and people falling.
And so many Connecticut families, Connecticut workers, affected by that tragedy. That was, very emotional, tough story to cover.
Another tough story was the 2001 arrest of Waterbury Mayor Phil Giordano.
Special Agent Tien with the FBI.
Can you tell me what's going on inside, sir?
Aaron Cox was the Waterbury bureau reporter.
The FBI had wiretaps on Mr. Giordano because it was believed that there may have been some quid pro quo and maybe that he was taking bribes.
What they heard on the wiretaps was much worse. Giordano arranging to have a prostitute bring him 2 young girls to molest. A jury found him guilty on 17 counts. While that was making its way through the courts,
39-0, Connecticut is perfect.
The UConn women won their 3rd championship on the basketball court. Back in the court of law, 2002 saw Kennedy cousin Michael Skakel on trial for the murder of neighbor Martha Moxley from 1975. A jury found him guilty.
I'm not here to start dissing the judge. I think errors may have been made.
People are still debating whether attorney Mickey Sherman provided an adequate defense or was playing to the cameras.
He provided comment and summary to that large media gathering every day. So some people might question whether his focus was in the right place.
In 2003, the mayor of Bridgeport went on trial. Joe Ganim was accused of getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and gifts in exchange for steering city contracts to certain companies.
This is not an easy or fun process for anybody who's ever been involved, and I wish it on no one.
Ganim would sit at the defense table in the morning, then go back and run the city every afternoon until a jury convicted him on 16 counts, sending him to prison for 7 years. In the middle of that trial came one of the biggest storms of the decade.
Meteorologists started with us just last week, and now look what we have thrown you into.
Gil Simmons had just joined News Channel 8.
And the coworkers that I thought initially liked me didn't even want to talk to me after that.
All that snow was forgotten in April when
They did it!
the UConn women won their 4th national championship.
Gino Auriemma is one of the greatest coaches ever, period. Men's, women's, no matter what. What they've done up there is probably never going to be duplicated.
Gino Auriemma made women's basketball so popular in Connecticut, the Mohegan Tribe brought a WNBA team to Mohegan Sun in 2003.
And that's going to do it.
The very next year, the men won their 2nd national title, and the very next night,
UConn wins 3 national championships in a row. The men and women have done it in the same year.
While the victory parade was going around the Capitol in Hartford, lawmakers inside were working on the impeachment of Governor John Rowland. Then in June of 2004,
I will officially step down as governor.
6 months later, he pled guilty to not paying taxes on gifts from state contractors and was sentenced to a year in prison. By 2005, serial killer Michael Ross had already been in prison for 30 years for killing 8 women. He gave up on his appeals, and on May 13th, as anti-death penalty protesters gathered outside the prison, he became the only person executed in Connecticut in the past 60 years.
A wall of water well over 10 feet high washed away everything on the ground floor.
Later that year, Hurricane Katrina battered the Gulf Coast.
Everything I owned was in that rubble pile.
News Channel 8 was there to tell the stories of loss and of the folks from Connecticut there to help.
It really made you think, you know, and we had our own ways of getting through the days, but it was tough.
In January 2007, some intentional destruction in New Haven. The Elm City imploded the Coliseum. 35 years of concerts and sports blown up to make way for a parking lot.
It began as a home invasion.
In July of 2007, a home invasion robbery in Cheshire turned into a gruesome murder. Erin Cox remembers her first live report on the scene.
The neighbors were gathered behind the camera, and they were hearing me say that there were 3 fatalities and 1 survivor. And I could hear the gasps.
I actually live not far away from that scene. And I remember coming in that morning and us being on the air for pretty much all day.
It was robbery, rape, arson, and murder, all in an upscale suburb.
I think that made some people think about getting protection for themselves in their house who didn't have those worries before.
The trial of the 2 parolees caught at the scene would shape the state's death penalty debate in the coming decade. In 2009, a pet chimpanzee named Travis mauled a friend of his owner and was shot dead by Stamford police. Then, a string of tragedies involving young people. A Wesleyan student shot and killed by a stalker in May. In June, a speeding Milford police cruiser killed 2 teenagers. The officer later sent to prison. The body of Yale grad student Annie Lay was found stuffed in the wall of a research building on what was supposed to be her wedding day in September. A co-worker confessed to her murder. And standout UConn cornerback Jasper Howard was stabbed to death outside a post-game party. His killer pled no contest to manslaughter in court. But let's end the decade with the other court. Because in 2009, the UConn women won their 6th national title, with many more to come in the next decade. I'm Kent Pierce, News 8.